Hi, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. To give the guests a bit of a background, you've obviously worked heavily in capital delivery projects over your whole career, and now you're the CEO at MethodGrid. So how did you end up getting to that stage in your career?
I got introduced to MethodGrid when I was working for Capita, and I owned Capita's project delivery methodology. And I got introduced to Don Morehouse, who's the original founder of MethodGrid. And we both had a shared passion for how you help build capability within organizations. And Don made a very straight offer to me. He said, look, what you want to do with your career is exactly what I want MethodGrid to be. So he made a bold offer and said, look, would you come and join MethodGrid? And then would you at a point in time, become the CEO? And I was appointed as the CEO in November last year. It's been a fantastic journey for me individually, but also team are absolutely fantastic as well.
Awesome. And to give sort of people who don't necessarily have heard of MethodGrid, at a high level, what does MethodGrid do?
I think the one key challenge, that problem where you're struggling to get people to be consistent, have a standardized way of working, maybe you're pulling your hair out at like teams constantly reinventing the wheel. That's the problem. That's the problem we solve. And a lot of people go, oh, how do you do that? And I think at its simplest form, and it is a very simple concept, all we've done is create a platform that allows you to integrate knowledge, process, governance, and delivery as an integrated platform. And we came up with a concept that it would allow clients to build a playbook. Here's the stages, here's your deliverables. When you click and open a deliverable, it just gives the human exactly what they need when they need it, and just helps them get clarity on their ways of working. Yeah, that is essentially MethodGrid.
Question that kind of comes to my head there is, why do you think, and I think I know the answer already, but why do you think so many people struggle to follow process? I've obviously experienced it in my own business. I think I spoke to you about it last week when we initially spoke about implementation, but why do you think people struggle so much to follow process and try and reinvent that wheel?
I think that in my head, there's two types of reinventing the wheel. One's really valuable and one isn't. And I think what you want to help people do is, if they're reinventing the wheel to innovate and improve the process, that's fantastic. But if they're reinventing the wheel because they can't find the information they need, I think a lot of organizations have the kind of phrase I come up with, we've written it down, job done.
Yeah.
Which broadly translates to, we've written it down, but we've written it down in this PDF or in this SharePoint site. And I think the kind of mindset is, it's your job to go and find out where all of that information is. And if you don't follow it, I'm just going to shout. You get the phrase of, why don't people, or leaders go, oh, they're just not following the process. And when you look at it, and if you try and think of it from the human's perspective, they are faced with this information over here. I've got to go to that SharePoint for that. That information is managed by that function. But then if I want to work out how that function actually works in my I've got to go and speak to them, and that's a different SharePoint site. And I think what happens to people is there's just a cognitive overload. It just becomes incredibly difficult for them to actually find out what the ways of working are, and then build that picture in their head, whilst they're also in a very stressful environment about how they deliver the actual project. So I think the reinventing the wheel that isn't great is they are struggling to define the way of working whilst they're also trying to deliver the project. And you get the kind of, every time we start a new project, it feels like we start from scratch. I think the worst type of ones, I think that really niggle people are, I've just spent ages building this deliverable or this template or this policy or produce something, only to be told by someone who's been in the business long enough that knows where to look and goes, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that. That was over there. And it's that kind of frustration where teams feel like that's the kind of negative reinventing the wheel.
Well, I guess what you're saying is that it's almost about having a single source of truth, construction terminology, somewhere where people can go and go, this is our process. I guess that's what it's about with what you guys do. That would be fair to say?
Yeah, I think the thing that we've learned is when you think about single source of the truth, and when you think about capital project delivery, it involves a whole set of different functions that have to communicate and work together, like design, project management, like health and safety, site, sustainability. And I think a lot of when we sit down with people and start looking to try and build their playbook for the first time, it's like, oh yeah, we actually don't need that there. We need that there. And I think that is, I think one of the core challenges is how you break down the kind of cross functions and functional silos that just naturally exist. When it comes to ways of working, you want that to be like a really efficient kind of factory. And that's really, I think, what we found by visualizing the project and making it very visible, but making it cross functional, both from you can visualize the left to like the life cycle and the stages and the gates you need to go through. But then as you look up and down, you can then see how all the functions need to interact.
Mentioned earlier around every job you start feels like a brand new process, and I think that's pretty very relevant for people in construction. How does how do you build a process, right, that is relatively rigid to an extent? Every construction project's different, whether you're building a 40 story tower block or whether you're building a 100 plot development of single high rise. So how do you create a process that's easy to follow but is flexible for the kind of changing conditions of projects?
Yeah, I think sometimes that's used as an excuse why ways of working aren't, I can't use your way of working because I can't tailor it or I can't right size it to my project. I think what we've learned, and I'd probably put a shelf life on that you can define one way of working for capital project delivery. I don't think it exists. And I think that's the limitations that we have with static content like SharePoint, a PDF. It's not going to give teams the guidelines and rules to be able to dynamically change and react to situations and environments. I think what we learned was to say, look, you can build playbooks, but you can then build different playbooks. So maybe you have a playbook for, if I use a consulting example, they'll build some of the consultancies we work with, they will operate in rail, they'll operate in national highways, they'll operate with Reba. And they have these different frameworks. And so when we do this type of work, we need to use this framework and we need to use these gates, or we are actually delivering a particular solution and we do it every time. So we use this playbook. So the playbooks themselves, I think, need to be built for a clear purpose and a clear scenario that you want to help teams navigate. But when it comes to, okay, I've got this playbook and it tells me, here's all the things I need to do. What we've learned is, and it's human psychology, humans love to problem solve. That's key nature for them. So if it's too rigid and they can't anchor themselves to it and they can't see ways of working as a solution to how they're going to solve the problem, it's just this rigid thing, naturally people are just going to disengage with it. And what we learned was to say, actually, you clone a playbook for each project and I would give you the playbook here and I'll be like, okay, look, I think I've given you 80% of what you need. Some of the stuff in there is mandatory. If you don't do it, I'll probably be taken to prison or it'll put humans at risk. So there's kind of regulatory requirements. But it's then to say, look, rather than you faffing around trying to work out how you're going to manage risk, that's all kind of done for you, written down, and that's how, here's your risk register or template, that's all done. What I want you to focus on is, look, what's the scope of the project? How best do we deliver it? What procurement route are we going to take? What suppliers are we going to engage with? I want you to take this playbook and tailor it and right size it and work it out. But I want you to make that transparent. Transparent to the project team, which is most important. But then I want you to be able to play it back to me because I want, from an assurance perspective, I want to make sure that, yeah, the way that you've tailored it and adjusted it, it's right sized. And I think that's how we've solved the age old problem of how do you give the teams the flexibility to tailor and right size your methodology and your approach. And what we've learned so far is it has to be, you have to give that freedom at a project level, but it has to be transparent.
When you give people that 80%, how do you think that translates to the ground and the delivery program itself?
I think it's, for a lot of people, there are always a kind of few lone wolves out there that kind that and that's probably one of the other concerns. If you don't have this like structured ways of working, you are subject to the lone wolf coming in, elbows out, and it's we're not doing it that your way, we're doing it my way. And that's disruptive enough. But I think for the majority of people, I think it gives them it takes a pain point away. It's like I don't have to worry about like stage gates, or I don't have to worry about how we're going to just do the basics. That's all written down for me. I don't have to re-explain it. I can just point my team to it and say, look, that's the standard. There's all the controls you need to evidence. That's what I need you to follow. And it's for a lot of people, that takes a lot of the stress away. I can now just focus on, okay, what is different and what is unique, and where do I need to tailor it, and how can I have a conversation with a client because they're like, oh, we want to do it this way and that way, and we think we've got this, but we haven't got that. And you can use the playbook to facilitate that conversation, so it can be more of a how you've co-designed like the ways of working, but the approach that you're going to take with a client, again, it being transparent.
Yeah, I was reading the yesterday. Actually, I was doing a little bit of research before I jumped on to the podcast today. And there's a guy you probably know, a guy called Bent Flyberg. Is that I got pronounced that? Leading mega projects around the world, and he said that the kind of current lessons and practices are fundamentally broken, and organisations repeatedly make the same mistakes over and over again. So, how do you take lessons learned on a project and actually convert that into the playbook that then changes that process so it's better each time and continually improves?
Yeah, I think Ben's like frustration is probably, and you could ask, if you're watching the podcast, you could ask the question to yourself and be like, if I look at my organization, how well have we codified actually how we deliver projects? And I think the sad kind of response to that is most organizations haven't really solved the fundamental basic problem of just giving people that ways of working are clearly understood, universally understood, and consistently followed. We still really struggle with that primary outcome that you're trying to help. When it comes to lessons learned, I think I look at it as there's kind of two flavors of lessons learned. There's things that we've learned and we look at it and go, that can never happen again. And therefore we just need to figure out how we codify that into ways of working. But if you haven't got robust ways of structuring ways of working, good luck, because it'll just be, oh, how are you going to actually put it into production? And that's the one thing we've learned with playbooks is, okay, you can adjust the playbook, you can improve the playbook, but then as you're cloning it for every project, that insight is then going to be applied in practice. Whereas I think a lot of people say, oh, we've learned loads of stuff, we've got it in a spreadsheet, and we're hoping that people at the start of the project will look at it and then will then apply that lesson to the way of thinking in a project. I think the success rate of that is relatively low, especially if your ways of working are scattered across different PDFs and documents. That probably just adds another flavor of, oh, I need to look at another source of information. So I think there's lessons learned that you would say, actually, we need to get that applied to ways of working. Similar with innovation, but we can talk about that in a bit.
Yeah.
The other flavor of lessons learned is contextual lessons learned, which I think is harder for most. And we're experimenting with it using AI at the moment, which is, I'm on my project, I'm looking at the design, potentially I've picked a supplier or I've picked a material, and then somebody has also used that material on a different project in a different region in a different location, and actually it didn't work or it failed. And it's how quickly can we get lessons learned to be reactive to say, I'm doing some work, and then systems push up contextual information to you at the point that it's relevant. And I think that's a lot harder. We have it switched on in our software engineering playbook and it works for us. So we did a release once that we didn't test in pre-production and we had to back it out because we should have done. But when we did a change 6 months later, the system looked at the project, looked at the type of change that we were doing again, and then actively promoted a lesson that was to our lead backend developer. And it was like, by the way, I think this change is linked to this lesson. Do you want me to add this type of test to the test plan? And it pushed that recommendation, and you can say yes, and it added it to the playbook. And I think that's a different type of lesson. I think that's where probably as we get more comfortable with machine learning and behavior and kind of understanding how we apply, that's a really good use case for AI actually looking at your project information, where you are in the process, and then seeing and then presenting lessons to you that it might think are relevant.
Okay. So there's something that comes to mind, and the reason I'm smiling is because I think there's a potential opportunity here. So I think, and it's probably kind of building on what you're saying, but is what you're saying, say I'm running a project and I've got multiple pieces of software. If I've got a situation where a process hasn't worked, or for example, if I look at supply chain, say supply performance management, a supplier has badly performed on a project, as you said, in a northern region on the particular, when we've gone through that performance management piece, we've reviewed them and they've not performed on something. Is what you're saying is that data then across maybe from a health and safety perspective for a subcontractor, that data could then be pulled and then it could, using AI, change the way in which the kind of the structure or the program in potentially something like method grid works. Is that, have I got that wrong in
Yeah,
the mistake?
that's a bit more. That's a bit more further forward. I think the probably the first what we will see is lessons, because I think some organisations are fairly advanced with lessons learned. Some aren't. Though. I'll just be transparent. Some are, you know, it's in all different spreadsheets, but some have actually no. Look, there's a standard database. All of them go in there, and it'll be easier for them. But it's then looking at giving AI the ability then, or machine learning, to look at it, and then you select a supplier for your project, and you add that to your project, and then AI would say, by the way, this supplier has done this type of work similar, and this is what works really well. Or here are some of the warnings that we've learned about this supplier and the things that you have to actually do to make it successful. I think that would be the first stage. The latter one is more interesting, and we're experimenting with this at the moment. And it's where, when you look at defining playbooks or ways of working, I think in the future it could be much more dynamic. And what I mean by that is PACE is a really good example. So PACE is a tailorable framework for network rail. Sometimes it can be like, if your project risk is really high, you've got 4 stages. If it's really low, you can do it in 2 stages. And what we're trying to play around with is, okay, can I have a conversation as me as a project manager? I'm interacting with a playbook. Can I have an interaction with the platform or with AI and say, look, this is my project. I'm doing this. It involves this, and this is, I think, what the risks are, what the level of risk it is. And it then to suggest or like co-design the playbook with you and say, oh, actually, I think based on your governance, I think it could be 2-stage, but we need to merge this and this. I know you're working with it in Scotland, so by the way, I've added in potentially, rather than if it's land and consent, it might be like, these are the people that you need to manage and connect with to get all the approvals done. And I think that's what I'm more interested in with Method Grid, is how can we dynamically alter ways of working to be reflective based on that type of dialogue and learning from projects? Because I think that's hopefully where we'll get to.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, isn't it? And I guess like when you're asking a machine or a platform that question, I guess all that data's got to be from everything that's learned before as well. So it just keeps constantly feeding. So it's a constant cycle to almost be to the point where, would you say that 80% can even become 90% and even 100%, where you just say, this is what I'm doing, and it goes away and builds it? Or do you think you always need that human element? Or am I jumping the gun?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think for now, I think there'll always be a human element to it. Yeah, sometimes I imagine a world where it wouldn't do, but I think we're probably maybe 10 years away from being told everything's told to us by a machine. That doesn't naturally feel right yet.
I hope we don't, to be honest.
And I was imagining where we don't know it's a machine. The way that machines talk back to us and the way that AI generates kind of avatars that are very human in nature at the moment. I was like, oh, we just wouldn't know. It would just be telling us, and we just think we'd be talking to a human. But I think for now, no, I think there will always be a human element and a team element, a collaboration that is working both with the machine helping go and look at all of that information and push recommendations to us, but we are in control and go, no, that's right, that's wrong. We could do that, but actually, no, we need to do it this way. And I think that is a collaboration between the team, but also leveraging AI to help us access all of the information that we need, and then but then help us actually tailor ways of working.
Just parking the AI thought for a second. I was reading on your LinkedIn, I think one of the posts you did was talking about culture and how you actually get teams to follow the process, because it's all well and good having it on a system. It's all well and good having it documented or whatever. But how, from a culture perspective, do you actually get people to follow process and feel comfortable following the process? But like you crucially said, get them to innovate at the right time.
I think that's probably one of the key challenges that most organizations will face. And I don't think systems fundamentally can solve that problem. Some clients, where if you work for a really creative, innovative, like you're known for your creativity, then when you say, oh, look, we're going to standardize ways of working, we all want you to become like, be really consistent and follow the process. In those type of culture, that's really difficult. And I think when you look at that, you have to think about how do we best communicate the use of the playbook in that environment. We still got to make sure that we do things, but what's the language that we choose to communicate in that world? And it might be, look, we want you to be creative and we want you to be innovative, but you can't really innovate a risk register. So let's take all the stuff away that just doesn't, we don't really want you to innovate. We want you to innovate on sustainability, materials, the design, and we want to take all of the noise away so that you can focus on that. And I think so that for that culture, but for some of the others, and I think the tier one subcontractors, like they just teams like they are screaming out, look, we just want clarity on ways of working. We want to be compliant. We want to be able to evidence it. We're proud of the standards that we have. And they just take to the playbook, duck to water in those environments because it gives them exactly what they need. But I think you're always, when we do projects, it's always working on, look, what type of culture are you? Because it will influence really how we're going to communicate about how ways of working need to be defined and what the key messages are that are going to be for staff. But the other bit of guidance I would give, and it's probably for leaders, which I hear it a few times, there's a couple of spectrums. I think you have to be able to lead and tell your people why it's important. And look, we want consistent ways of working. I want you to follow it. I want you to use it. And you have to lead with that and reinforce it as well. I think there's a really good atomic habit as looking at it. You can't just say to people, just follow the process. Why aren't people following the process and then moving on? You have to look at the system. And when you honestly look at the system, not through your lens and not through the we've written it down, job done, I think you have to be, look, how effective is the system that I've put in place that help people execute ways of working? And if you're honest with that assessment, and if you look at the system and you go, that's hard work, then don't be surprised. You'll just keep repeating, why don't people follow the process? I think you really have to look at the system and go, how am I actually going to think about what they need and put those things in place that makes it easier for them to actually follow it in the first place?
How often do you think you should review that process? And that might be a very difficult question to answer depending on the business, et cetera, et cetera. But should that be an ongoing, continuous improvement process, or should it be something you do yearly?
No, I think one phrase I came up with was like flash innovation. Like people are always going to look at your way of working and they're going to poke it and they're going to try and find a better way. Like humans are like naturally lazy creatures. We are always seeking for the path of least resistance. It's a great trait because we're always trying to find ways to improve things. It might not be like the way that we want them to do it, like they're reinventing the wheel or they're trying to break stuff and you want them to be consistent, but that is their natural like reaction. We're problem solvers. We like trying to make things more efficient, and because then we want our time back. And if you know that's what they're going to do, then okay, great. It's really then how you leverage it and leverage that behavior. But the honest answer is, if your ways of working are just like a PDF or a SharePoint site, the human's going to be like, well, yeah, we can improve the process, but what I class it as flash innovation. One project did it. But then when you try and codify that so that you want every project to follow it and then be able to implement it and use that new technique or use that new tool, if your ways of working are just If someone goes, oh, well, could you write that up on the SharePoint site? And the guy just goes, I could, yeah, okay. In their head, they're like, no one's going to read it. It's easily ignored, never followed. And that's one of the concepts I think we take place is look, your way of working and delivery have to be connected. Like as soon as your knowledge and your process are disconnected from delivery, you've lost a vital feedback loop. And that's the part that we focused on is look, the thing we take is, okay, you found a better, smarter way. Can you add it to the playbook so that the next clone or the next iteration that's given to the next project banner, it's in it. So, you have to follow it. You have to tick it off. You have to upload the evidence that it's been done. But as you know that when you're using the process and knowledge in delivery, you know that it's connected. And when people break it or go, oh, we don't need that, or your playbook doesn't have this in it, we need to add it, you're getting much richer feedback and being able to act on it, and also get a higher success rate in actually I've codified ways of working. And actually when we make a change, then at least I know the teams will follow it and they have to use it or say, no, I'm not doing it. But I think that's the key bit is how do I get a better connection between process, knowledge, and delivery?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm just thinking there the last few bits you said. If I was to relate that to what I do or what I have been doing in my current business, it's always funny when the clients are silent and they're not asking for changes and not asking things to be improved. You should be worried, and that's if people are engaged and they're actually suggesting new ways of working. Then they're following the process and they're trying to push the business to working harder.
Ex- Yeah, I think in some cases, I think people have given up. In some cases, I've tried it, I've written it down. I can't find the best SharePoint design. I've written I paid a fortune to have a consultancy build me a kind of glossy PDF manual, spent a lot of money on it. 6 months later, it's just sat on a shelf gathering dust, and I'm frustrated as a leader or as someone that's in charge of a process. I'm frustrated. I'm naturally frustrated with it, and then I just give up, and it goes back to Wild West.
Why do you feel that putting it into a digital platform that's flexible is so much better than PDFs? Is it because of one place to go, or is it because of flexibility? Why do you think that makes it better and easier to follow?
I think the most fundamental point of what we do or the playbook concept is it is built around the life cycle. So, and this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, look, where are you? Where are you? What stage are you at? What function are you working for? So that you can quickly go and look at the playbook and go, I'm actually in stage 2. Oh, here's project management, here's design management. Okay, this is what we need to do. And when I open that up, okay, this is the information I need. And I think it's that thinking about that logically laying it out in kind of the map that they're trying to build in their head is what's critical. Because you've got I think you've got maybe 2 minutes of time where they're looking for that information. If it takes them 3 minutes or 4 minutes, they'll be like, do you know what, this is just too hard, I'm just going to give up. Do you know what, let's just do it my way. Or I can't find the template, I've been looking for it for ages, let's just use this one, I used it at my previous client, it's probably good enough. But that's I think that is a key point, is how quickly you can serve the information they are looking for. And I think AI helps, but I think what we've tried to do is make it like really simple, like use the basics of like visual management, just to be, here I am, there's the stage, great, what themes have we got, what deliverables do we have to produce, and when I click on the stage gate, tell me, be transparent with me, what do I actually have to evidence and what do I have to produce so that we get through the stage. I think I've had a few people, to be honest, the reaction is what I look at. It's not, yes, it's frustration, but a lot of times it's anger. They are really frustrated with their company for having such woeful process and such governance. So they're like, look, you've made my life really difficult. I go to do gate 2, and it's every time I go to it, it's like, you change it feels like you change the goalpost. And I'm like, what I want is consistency, structure, so that we can become really repeatable. I think that's the balance. So yeah, sometimes like ways of working does have a massive impact on staff retention, staff overall kind of health and well-being as well.
That's an interesting point, actually. Retention, because I know that if if everyone's working in harmony, it feels so much nicer. It feels a much nicer environment to be in. You're all, as you say, the goalposts aren't constantly being moved. So naturally, everyone works better together. The outcome's better. You deliver better. You probably save money for the business. The profit for the business is higher, and all of a sudden you've got a fantastic running business. And I guess that's really difficult, particularly in larger companies. When you've got a company we talk about some of these larger contractors that are in the billions, they've got anywhere between 5 and 15,000 employees. Do you think it's even more important for companies like that, or?
And yeah, I think the larger you get, I think the harder the challenge is. But I think there are a number of factors that are going on in those larger organizations. Some symptoms I would look at and say a lot of those larger organizations are actually not one organization. They're an acquisition of 6 or 7 that have been like put together very quickly, and like ways of working in that environment are really difficult because it's like, hang on, we used to do it our way and now we've got 6 different versions of it. So there's that challenge where it's very difficult to then start to harmonize and get those groups to be efficient. So there's the kind of merger challenge.
Mhm.
I think there is just, if you work for the consulting organizations, I think if they were honest, if they sold project management and cost management and design management, and they're 3 individual kind of practices within the consulting firm, I think it would be the client that would recognize that, says, hang on, guys, it feels like I'm buying from 3 separate organizations. It just doesn't join up. And that's just because they've got their cost management method, they've got their project management method, and they haven't really stitched that together in how that actually works. If you were a client and bought all 3 of those services, how seamlessly it would be that it integrates. I think that's when we build those playbooks for those types of clients, some of it for the first time, they're like, this actually is coming across like a cohesive solution and we're all clear on ways of working. The other, and I think this is probably more of an industry challenge, is we do a lot of work with JVs. And it's when you're joining forces and you're like, there's a kind of new company entity and you've got 3 or 4 of the prime contractors all been joined up and merged as a kind of single business entity. It's then, okay, what's the ways of working? And I think the reality is, well, JVs actually force those companies to agree what the ways of working actually are. You can't get away with it. If you're the prime contractor and you've got 3 services, that's great. You can get away with it. But when you're in a JV environment, you have to have common ways of working. And in some cases, you're the prime. So it's you to define that way of working. And then you want to integrate all the other suppliers to make them follow that process. Well, that in itself is a challenge. So yeah, a lot of the work we started to do, like May Stragados is a really good example on HS2. We just build them give them their own instance of the platform, and they can build that playbook. But then it just helps you get clarity on ways of working in a multi-company environment.
From a consultancy perspective, do you guys actually get involved in helping them build that playbook, or is it, here's the platform, this is how it works, we'll let you build it?
I'd say the majority were helping clients build the playbook. We built the platform so that clients can build their own playbooks. So there's no limitations in the platform. You could create you an instance and you could build a playbook for your organization. We help them design it. So we'll do a number of kind of playbook architecture sessions where we're trying to get people to understand it. We'll give them guidance on the best practice techniques of how you lay out the structure to get people to follow it. And then in some cases, clients are saying, look, can you build it? And we do. But we use a lot of AI to build playbooks. I'd say every playbook for a long time now, probably before GPT came about, we've used AI to help construct playbooks. Yeah. But I think the key for us is we'll never leave a client where they're dependent on us.
Yeah.
It's always, we have to transfer the capability of building playbooks to them so that they're self-efficient. And if they want us to come back, it's purely normally because they haven't got the time or the resources to focus on doing it. And they just want that done so that they can move on.
I have to ask the question, how does the AI piece work? Is it like feeding all these PDFs and Word documents into the kind of the generative AI machine,
Yeah.
or is that how it works? Yeah.
Yeah, we tend to, if we're building playbooks, we used to do, there's a really good analogy that we have when we used to do them manually. And I've got a few clients where it was way before AI. Some of those capital project delivery playbooks, multifunctional, like global, that was like a 6 month build. And that's a
Wow.
lot. It's a SaaS business for you to go, oh, look, yeah, you can buy the product, but it's going to take 6 months of build before you get value. I was like, in that world, I'd probably switch it and say, we're actually a consulting business, but we have this platform
Yeah.
that helps us do it. That's not method grid. That's not what we want to become. So that's why we early started to experiment with AI and about how we integrate with AI to make ways of working. Like, how do you get it to be 6 weeks? And we're there or thereabouts now. So most playbooks now we build is anywhere between 6 to 12 weeks, depending on how big and how complex they are. And then, yes, we are source grounding a language model to, like when we did Network Rail, we did Pace. There are, don't quote me, I think there are about 14 like tech like standards that relate to Pace. So we just source ground a language model on those standards. I think the code of conduct for Rail as well was also needed, and a few other kind of resources and their templates. And then off we go. We just say, look, okay, build me this element, build me this element, build me this element, give me the information about this. And what I love about AI in doing that is it helps us just we don't worry about grammar, spelling. We get a consistent voice. We get a consistent, what we call the kind of Goldilocks level of detail. So how much detail do you actually need to give in the playbook to help them follow it? The Goldilocks level of granularity is what they call it. But it's important. But then you get it consistent. Where when you do manual build, and especially if you give it to two people, one's written a few bullet points, someone's written War and Peace, and you're like, okay, well, we need to bring structure to it. But yeah, so AI, and rather than for us just look, oh, well, we can do a basic build in 6 weeks. What we've also stretched ourselves is, okay, how do you add video explainers? How do you add e-learning? Again, AI and some of the like platforms now that you can use, you can build those in. We'll build a video explainer in probably 30 minutes to an hour, or we'll build an e-learn course in about 3 hours. And it's using AI to help us things that used to be out of reach in terms of what you would imagine, like what would be the best ways of working in the world that you'd want to give your teams. That used to be out of reach, I think, from a time, effort, cost. And what I love about AI is actually, even for the smaller organizations, it's making it much more cost effective and accessible and easier to maintain and easier to update.
I think if any of the listeners are listening in here, they probably think you guys are miles ahead of everybody on the AI curve, which is exciting to hear. What do you see as the next big thing, not necessarily just for method grid, but for capital project delivery from an AI perspective, that's really going to transform the way projects are delivered?
I think I did a talk recently, and we do a grid talk live event each year with all our clients and a few interested people. And I think where we are right now, I think most people's access to AI is through platforms. So platforms have added, like we've done a feature to build content or a feature to build a process or a little bit of a component that does X, Y, and Z. It helps you do a task within that platform. And I think what those platforms are doing now is, okay, they're expanding the use of AI, but AI nor it is bound within the scope of the platform. So things like Bentley or Risk Connect or those systems, they're making AI have access to the information so that it can do more, but it's contained within the boundary of that system. And that'll happen. Where I think what will happen next, though, is if you think about commercializing what AI will do, is it's probably going to be competitive advantage. How well you own AI and how well you construct it, manage it, and deploy it, I think will be a differentiator in terms of your competitive advantage. So I think what we'll see is a shift from I don't want method grid connected to OpenAI's language model. I want it connected to my language model that we've chosen and we've source grounded, or it's ours, not yours, because I think clients will want to take more ownership of how they are building AI. And I think we called it'll be a natural shift from feature to role. I don't want a feature. I want a risk agent in my organization that I own, and it can talk to MetaGrid, it can talk to the risk register, it can look at external events, it can look at quality issues and all of that. But I've built that. That is our risk agent that we own, and it's connected to different systems, and we're giving it access to all of that data. I think naturally, because it's going to be a source of competitive advantage, clients are going to start to redraw that line. And that's just, I think, just a natural as we get more familiar with it. And as technology advances, I still think we're experimenting, but I think we're at that curve now where we can start to see that AI is going to be much more client led rather than just platforms adding in kind of features and widgets.
Features which, yeah, exactly. Are there any other, are you guys utilizing agents yet, or is that not quite where you guys are at?
No, I think when you're like a SaaS platform, I think you have to be realistic and look at where AI can be advantaged, where it can be applied. If I look at agents, I could build an agent within MethodGrid, and we probably will do, but actually, I think it would be more valuable that we just allow like primary agents like Copilot or Gemini be able to access MethodGrid and be able to talk to it. Because I think the reality will be is humans will not want, I've got to talk to the MethodGrid agent. Now I've got to talk to the Bentley agent. I've got to talk to this one. They won't want that. It'll be, and I think the desktop normally will be the primary agent. So I think it's more how you connect or make your platform accessible so that it can be a source of information, or that external agents can do things within your platform. I think for us, that's probably a safer bet than for us investing in building this super internal system. It'll be much more beneficial that, yeah, whatever platform or agent you want to use, you can just connect MethodGrid and it's part of that. There's no barriers that stop you on that journey.
To ask the question, because I think other people will be thinking it as well. Are these agents, do you think, actually going to replace a lot of what people do, or do you think they're just going to be information gatherers? Analysts?
It's a
Difficult
I
question.
think it's a difficult question. I think long term, as we get more and more confident with how we construct these agents and they become more familiar, I think we'll be happier that they're doing more things for us. I look at it in two ways. Is a lot of people say sometimes, oh, we can't use AI because our data's like really poorly structured or used. And I was like, for me, I look at AI and I think actually that's a really quick one. If we're struggling with the quality of how lessons learned are written, or if we're struggling with how people are filling in risks and the risk register isn't done, well, can't get the AI agent plugged into that and be like, okay, tell me what the risk is. Okay, a few questions, right, bang, there's the risk statement written. Or it's looking at your risk register and it pops out and says, by the way, this is past its due date, or you haven't filled the, I don't know, cost. It's not connected to the schedule, or it doesn't have this key information in it. Do you want me to put recommendation? I think it will hopefully help the project management or the team just get it right, help you get it right first time, but also help you meet the standard of what good looks like. And then I think the flip side of it is then, okay, if you've got ML running on, let's say, like risk registers, then what insights can it then push back to the human and be like, by the way, your project is very similar to these projects. You haven't got this risk in, or you haven't quantified it, or there's a change in, I don't know, the supply of certain bits of material that you're dependent on. By the way, I've detected that, and here's what I think the impact is. And I think that is where I see how it evolving. It's helping you get it right first time, but then I think it's then evolving and helping you spot things that you can't spot. Or you've got to be very good, or have a lot of time on your hands to be able to spot everything that's going on. I think that's where AI can play. It can spot patterns and it can look at things and push that information to you.
But I guess rather than taking jobs, it's more of a case of actually just improving the amount of workload and increasing the amount of workload you can get through, which ultimately just from an economic perspective just means you can deliver more faster.
Yeah, I think safer. I look at it in terms of like risk. I look at it in terms of hazards. I think about the kind of safety assessment, stuff like that. I think if you've got an intelligent assistant that's just making you think or looking at things and presenting things, oh, but you haven't got this, you're working at height, you've missed that. I think that's just helping us. You just feel more confident, really, in terms of the things that you put in place to actually help people get it right first time. I'm hoping, you would hope that when we introduce AI, that actually that's the big push, that we get things right first time, and actually we're much more compliant. The quality of work is much better. We make less mistakes. There's less rework, simply because we've got something that is looking at all the sources of information that we need and surfacing to us when it's important.
And what you've seen, because obviously the construction sector typically, I think, is getting much better. It has been, from what I can see, certainly patchy to adopt technology compared to the rest of the world. I think it's much, much better than it is now. But how far away do you think we are from using AI into our power? Because I think I can see it in a lot of the large companies, but still a lot of the medium to smaller companies are still running a lot of stuff on paper or manual-based process.
I think the hype of AI everyone's really excited about it. I think we're just about crossing that period where we're now starting to be a lot of talk around language models, how you use them, and the technologies now allowing clients to be able to take it and start to use it. So I think it's probably a little bit too soon to say, oh, look, I don't think some of the industries have adopted AI. I think AI has just gone through that kind of evolution period. And I think really like 26, 27, I think we'll start to see a lot more application of AI within the sector. And I think then we'll start I'm quite interested about, was it computer vision? Because I think that'll be another kind of key area for us in construction. The use of drones, the use of video, and if you have a drone above your site and it's detecting things and it's then feeding that back, that's another great use case. Was it network rails? I think Arup did it with network rail. One of them did it. They put videos on trains, and then you've got AI, computer vision, looking at the video of the train going through the track, and it's that leaf's overhanging, so we need to go and fix that. And that computer vision is the other one. And then what's the other big one? Quantum computing is the other one, which I think that's going to be a joy to watch really over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, how that just gives us apps so much more horsepower, so much more compute to be able to do simulations.
Do you think there's anything in particular from, obviously a lot of what we're talking about is obviously office based? Obviously the network rail thing you talked about is obviously site-based, but are there any particular site-based things apart from the drones and spotting risks that you could see people having as handheld devices or useful kind of technology that you're seeing come through?
I think sites are becoming more and more digital over time, and I think CDEs are forcing that kind of environment where you have to do certain checklists, your diaries, the site assessments, and we want it to be digital and we want it to be recorded. So I think naturally sites are becoming more and more digital. I'm sure they get a bit frustrated with it, but
every 5 minutes somebody comes down from senior management and says you need to start using this. It's been a pleasure to have you on, Pip. Last kind of closing question for you. If you had one piece of advice for a project director who is about to start a major project, what do you think is the single most important thing to get right?
That's a good question. I think naturally I'll probably say it, but I think clarity on ways of working, I think, for the team, and then probably clarity on responsibilities and scope, I think are probably the critical things.
Thank you very much for your time today. It's been a really good conversation.
Cool. Yeah, no, really enjoyed it. Thank you. Take care.